I'm going to share an oli today, oli pule e ho mai. Mahalo no loa no hui ana kia. E ho mai ka ike mai luna mai e. O na mea huna no eo. O na mele ho mai. E ho mai.
Can I turn this up?
E ho mai, e ho mai, ka ike mai, luna mai e. O na mea huna no eo. O na mele ho mai. E ho mai. E ho mai, e ho mai, ka ike mai, luna mai e. O na mea huna no eo. O na mele ho mai. E ho mai. E ho mai e.
Are you viewing TV?
I mean, it's just pretty sure. So you can bring the truck to work on it. Yeah. It's not that easy, but at the same time, that breaks my kids. Yeah, cut it all up.
All right, hi everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. Welcome to the DISplace Artist Talk, Creating Hawaiian Futures, with artists Kalei'okalani Matsui and Kevin Matthew Kaunuali'i Kiesel, moderated by guest curator Lehuauakea. My name is Victoria. I am the head of integrated learning at Five Oaks Museum, and we are super excited to hear from the artists about their work around imagining and creating Hawaiian futures this evening. Before we get into the program, here's some quick Zoom housekeeping. We will be recording tonight's program, so feel free to turn your cameras on or leave them off, whatever's your preference, but please stay muted. Those buttons can be found at the bottom of your screen. We recommend selecting speaker view so that the speakers appear in full screen while they are talking. This program will be about an hour and a half long. We'll start with slide presentations of their work by each artist, followed by a conversation around creating Hawaiian futures, and conclude with an audience Q&A. Feel free to use the chat box for comments and questions throughout the evening. I now want to acknowledge that the land on which Five Oaks Museum sits and occupies today is the traditional land of the Tualatin Kalapuya. As David Harrelson of the Confederate Tribes of Grand Ronde says, the Kalapuya have always been here and will always be here. The Portland metro region rests on the homes of the Multnomah, Kathlamet, Chinook, Clackamas, Molalla, and Kalapuya peoples. Today, there are over 10,000 peoples of Indigenous descent and over 300 tribes represented in the Portland metro region. We thank these people and their descendants for being the original caretakers of this land. We acknowledge the displacement, genocide, and assimilation that still impacts many Indigenous families today. We honor the resilience and collective work of Indigenous people, and we show respect by critically interrogating history and how we represent and teach it. Now I'd like to share a little bit about the DISplace exhibition, which is the reason we're all here. DISplace is our first guest-curated exhibition with completely original historic research by co-curator Lehuauakea, along with co-curator Connolly Miyamoto. The entire exhibition, complete with in-depth history, personal stories from local community members, and artwork by Pacifica artists throughout the Pacific Northwest, is entirely viewable on the website. And there will be a link dropped in the chat. The guest curator program at Five Oaks Museum decentralizes the museum's singular authority and places the curation and storytelling of all major exhibitions in the hands of our community members, who can speak about their own history and experiences the most authentically. If you appreciate this work, please consider making a donation at the link in the chat. Your support through financial giving has a real tangible effect. Your donations go back into the community and they directly help us grow our ability to provide ethical compensation for the cultural makers creating the museum's content, like Kalei'okalani, Kevin, and Lehuauakea tonight. Your donations also allow us to carry out the guest curator program and create exhibitions like DISplace. And our recurring giving option is a great way for your dollars to have a big impact. And recurring giving at any level earns you a membership to the museum. So you are officially part of the family then. All right, we are so grateful that you're all here with us this evening, and I'm so excited to introduce you to these amazing artists. Here is a little bit of their backgrounds. Kalei'okalani Matsui is of Kanaka, Maoli, Black, Japanese, and Chinese heritage, and was born and raised in Waianae, Oahu. Kalei is the founding member of Polynesian dance troupe Haraiti Mana, based in Seattle's Chinatown International District. Kevin Matthew Kaunuali'i Kiesel was born on the island of Oahu and grew up in Wahiawa. His ethnic background is Hawaiian, Chinese, and Caucasian. And in 2007, Kevin moved to Seattle to pursue an art education, where he fused his interest in arts, culture, and science fiction. And our moderator today, guest curator Lehuauakea, is a mixed Native Hawaiian interdisciplinary artist and kapa-maker from the Big Island of Hawaii. Their art practice reflects on cultural and biological ecologies, identity, and what it means to build a life rooted in Indigenous sustainability and traditional practices. Kalei, Kevin, and Lehua, thank you so much for bringing your time, energy, talents, and culture to this platform. We are honored to share the incredible work that you've done. All right, so we are going to start off with Kalei's slides.
Mahalo nui loa, Victoria, and everyone at Five Oaks Museum. Mahalo nui. Aloha mai ka ko, aloha o Kalei'okalani ko'uino, a I ole o Kalei. He ra'atira au no ko upupu ori a Hula o Huraiti mana. A he alaka I au no ka hale ho ike ike o Winglu, o ka ike no ka po'e Asian Pacific America. He haku leio. Mahalo nui loa no hui ana keia. Aloha everybody, my name is Kalei'okalani, or Kalei, and I am the founder and leader of the Polynesian dance troupe Huraiti Mana. As Victoria had been sharing with you, we practice both Ori Tahiti and Hula, based in Seattle's Chinatown International District. I am also a director at the Wing-Luke Museum of the Asian Pacific American Experience, and I am a lay weaver. So thank you so much for inviting me as a part of DISplace, but also as a part of this artist talk this evening. Mahalo nui loa. On to the next slide. I wanted to show everybody the lyrics to the oli that I had shared earlier today at the start of our meeting together, oli pule or e ho mai. It is part of Hawaiian protocol to begin with an oli. We have oli for every occasion. And I chose this one in particular because it is typically said at the start of a gathering, start of building a relationship, time for exchange, and for a giving of knowledge. And so you're asking, you're seeking for wisdom from knowledge from above, wisdom contained in every song, asking for it to be given forth. So you come very eagerly, but you also come humbly. And you need both, to be able to grow. which is our goal here today. It's a cultural exchange. It's something that is integral to Polynesian culture, and especially Kanaka Maoli or Native Hawaiian. And as a part of Hawaiian protocol, it is to do the right thing at the right time, in the right place, with the right people. So I feel like we are doing that today. Mahalo. On to my next slide. I wanted to tell you a little bit about myself. O waenai e ku'one hanaue no Oahu ka Lehuauakea Seattle, Des Moines, I ke Yamanawa. He ku'umauna o Pu'uka'ala, he ku'ukakai o Pu'uka'i. So Waenai is the sands of my birth. I am from Oahu, but I live now in Seattle, Des Moines. I've been here since 2009, and my mountain is Mount Ka'ala, and my ocean is Pu'uka'i, or Pu'uka'i Bay, which is where this picture comes from. It's a photo of my 8th birthday at Pu'uka'i, and in typical Hawaii style, we have the tarp tent set up, we got the banquet tables, foldable iron chairs out, my annual piñata, and plenty coconut trees around, which Pu'uka'i was, or as we knew growing up, we called it Pu'uka'i Bay. Was very famous for its coconut trees. At Pu'uka'i Bay, there is the home of Ku'ilioloa Heiau, an ancient Hawaiian temple that was destroyed by the United States military for use of bunkers during World War II, but has since been restored and is cared for to this day. Also seen from Pu'uka'i is Pu'uka'ala, Mount Ka'ala, which is the tallest point on Oahu and where resides the goddess of the summit, Kaiona, who guides wayward travelers in the form of an iwa bird. At the base of Pu'uka'ala was once a fish pond guarded by the goddess Kamoha, where the ali'i, or the chiefs, could fish for mullet, and after which Wai'anae is named Mullet Water. All right. On my next slide, I wanted to continue sharing about where I grew up. So I didn't grow up knowing all these mo'olelo that I just briefly shared, knowing the histories of Wai'anae or Pu'uka'i Bay or the Aina that I grew up in. I grew up knowing about Wai'anae, or Wai'anae, as we call it, the same way that everyone seemed to know about Wai'anae. And despite the reputation, in spite of it, because of it, I loved Wai'anae regardless, and I repped it very hard. And I wanted to kind of reference a beautiful short documentary I was able to watch recently by Native Hawaiian filmmaker Sierra Lacey. It's a documentary titled "They Don't Know What to Do with Us," to give you some insight of where I come from. Hawaii has the highest rate of homelessness in the United States, and Hawaii's largest houseless community lives in Wai'anae. There's 200 residents, and 45 of them are children. Wai'anae is also the largest congregation of Native Hawaiians in the entire island of Oahu because we were pushed farthest from the bustling economic engine that is now Honolulu, right? And as another writer who I admired and who had changed my perspective in my journey coming closer to my Hawaiian self is author Glenn Grant, who writes in Hawaiian Legends of Ghosts and Ghost Gods, a book my husband had gifted to me in my burning pursuit to learn more about my genealogical heritage. Glenn Grant writes, although often disparaged and ridiculed as a district with many social problems, Wai'anae remains an overwhelmingly Hawaiian place that, despite stereotypes and socioeconomic challenges, breathes the cultural values of aloha kanaka and aloha aina, love of human beings and land, inherited through the centuries. Of course, the malihini from outside Wai'anae, without the insight of a kama'aina, may be blind to the sense of place. Without a knowledge of Hawaiian place names, the history, the legends, the sacred sites, Waianae is simply another rural area impacted by sprawling shopping centers, increased traffic, crowded housing, lacking the Hawaiianness that provides a deeper understanding. Yeah. And when I read that, when my husband had come across that and shared that with me, actually while we were on our honeymoon after we got married, it just really opened my eyes to come to terms with the lack of understanding, like that people in Waianae, Native Hawaiians especially, lack in their education growing up. You know, how empowering would it be if every child in Waianae knew the roots of their land, yeah, and these histories? It would change the perspectives not only of their hometown but of themselves. I always had a feeling that Waianae was filled with mana, you know, that my own path was filled with the spiritual power, but I couldn't quite say, I didn't have the words, I didn't have the language, I didn't have the place names to say why that was. Without the stories, without the lay to weave all of this together into my identity. So I set on a path to devour anything that would give me any insight, that would create connection, and that would make me say, oh, that's why, like, that's why we feel this way, or that's why we do this, or that's why, you know, I talk like this, you know. So a little bit about my home. On the next slide. He ku'umau kupuna hine o Blossom Le'ala Brown a o Sumie Hamada Onzuka. He ku'umau kupuna kane o Papa Benny Brown, my Arkansas, a o Ralph Hisomu Onzuka. He ku'umau makua o Jesse Le'ala Onzuka a o Randall Hisomu Onzuka. My grandmothers are Blossom Le'ala Brown and Sumie Hamada Onzuka. My grandfathers are my Papa Benny Brown, who's from Arkansas, and Ralph Hisomu Onzuka, after whom the Waianae High School baseball field is named. And my parents are Jesse Le'ala Onzuka and Randall Hisomu Onzuka. Pictured here, however, is my Papa Benny Brown, with all of his great-grandchildren and his grandchildren. I'm sitting to the right of him, or on his left, I guess. My kaikua ana, my older sisters on the other side, all my cousins around, my nephews and nieces. This was the last trip we got to take to Hawaii right before the pandemic hit. And it was his retirement party, my papa's retirement party. So. On the next slide, more photos of my ohana. He wahine Hawaii a paele a kepani a pakeio. I am Native Hawaiian, Black, Japanese, and Chinese mixed race woman. And around in these photos are, again, myself and my kaikuana, my sister. I'm also holding my mother next to me. My grandmother, her mother, is in the back of that photo on the left. My auntie, her sister, my cousins. Beneath that, bottom left, that's Oku'uipo, my sweetheart. Ekukane, my husband, who's in this talk today, but he's upstairs, so the sound is not messed up. And then my brother is in between my sister and I, and that's my Ku'akane, my father, on the right, and my mom again on the left. But I am proudly descendant of women who have never fit into colonized ideals, as neither do I. I am, like my lei that I've created and that is a part of the DISplace exhibit, we are both mixed in place, we're mixed in features, we're mixed in foundation. My entire life, people have been extremely adamant about disowning me in their mission to prove themselves right and to prove my identity wrong, you know. When asking about my background, now, it was hardly ever that people asked my background to know who I was or to get to know who I was, but instead to just prove that, oh, I must be whatever it is they have an idea structured of me. I felt very motivated by this in like a very racialized society that we have, right? Maybe because my mixed identity was just so incredulous, they couldn't grasp it. Yeah, it was something that I had made up. It had to have been, or that my physical features were lacking for one reason or another, or they were just drawing on my inability to fit in. Whether I was not able to fit in Waianae because I was going to now a city private school to Kamehameha 2 hours away, or whether I couldn't fit in at that private school because I grew up bare feet, you know, climbing mango trees, yeah, from Waianae. And it's been a long road of healing, of being able to rise above that and being able to fully accept myself for who I am and expressing and understanding my heritage as I am. And my lei has been very essential in this journey that I'm still on. And you know, people try to ask me then, okay, well, what about blood quantum? And if you're unfamiliar with that term, that's when you're like, oh, you know, a quarter this or 50% that, or however. And no, that doesn't solve the the issue of such conversations I find myself in, because I mean, I am twice more blood quantum with Black heritage than I am Kanaka Maoli. But that doesn't fly with people because of my features or how my features project. So it's a healing process that art definitely helps me. On my next slide, we can transition to this piece here. That's me. And the newest addition to my ohana, Hapaiau I ka'u pepe mua, I ka'u hiopo. I am currently carrying my first child. I'm very, very excited. Baby comes in June of this year. And I want to take a moment to begin sharing about my lei. The first lei that you are ever given in this world is the piko. You know, the piko is not only your belly button, if you're familiar with that term too, but your piko is your umbilical cord. Yeah, that's the first lei that you're given, and that's given through your maternal lineage, through your makuahine, through your mom. Yeah, and aloha mama, she's in this meeting too. This lei, this piko that I have, has been by far the greatest lei I have ever made. And I'm so thankful. The first lei that you give in life is when your arms, as a keiki, as a pepe, as a baby, is wrapped around your mother's neck. Hence, that's how come keiki children are called pua, or flowers, or oftentimes the children are called lei. A lei that adorns you in love. So I left Hawaii in 2009 and have lived here ever since in the Pacific Northwest. And I had been asking myself for a very long time, what does it mean to be Indigenous now outside of the land that I'm Indigenous to? And what will it be like to raise my children in Aina, in land different from what I had known myself? So on the next slide, a few photos. I hope I'm doing okay on time. A few photos of my lei. On the left, that's when they're made fresh, ready to go and adorn somebody. And then on the right, I have my lei dried, hanging on my wall upstairs, which I was thinking of sitting in front of, but I don't have good Wi-Fi up there. So my fresh flower lei is tradition indigenous to, native to Pacifica, Oceania, Polynesia, the Pacific Islands. And my styles are native to Hawaii. I do the wili style, lei pololei, lei kui, haku, hilo. There's so many styles. And those are my favorites, some of my favorites. Lei are not just decorative pieces. They share a spiritual connection with and are representative of the land they come from, the people who create them, and the people for whom they are made. Yeah? Lei is cultural, personal, and spiritual exchange of aloha, love, mana, power, and mana'o, knowledge. It's aesthetically beautiful embodiment of the innate practice of exchange. among Indigenous peoples and is a living counter to cultural appropriation. It's an art form that survives appropriation, that thrives in an era of Kanaka revitalization, and that perpetuates the futures of Hawaiian people. On my next slide is a photo of my favorite, close-up of my favorite type of lei to make, and that is the lei papahi in the wili or wrap form, focusing on alternating groups of lau and pua, leaves and flowers, and intricate patterns, drawing from modern inspirations. My lei are created from materials I can source in the Pacific Northwest, whether from my own yard or through local florists in the area. Some materials can be sourced from Hawaii through those florists, but very, very, very few. And even then, there's so many native endemic plants that are completely rare because of deforestation and destruction and legacies of that. Yeah. And so I have a papa, or a foundation, that is made with either a pliable leaf or a leaf that's made to be pliable, like la'i or tea leaf. And then I use strands of raffia or dried hau, dried bark, and laying each flower bunch at a time and wrapping once over, being very careful to wrap with uniformity throughout, so I can create a strong papa, create a strong spine. And the word papa is also very special because papa means foundation, like a board or your spine, but it also is the name of Papa Hanamoku, of Mother Earth, she who gives birth to islands, all intertwined. At first, I was very self-conscious about my discovering lei making because I discovered it being away from home. I had danced hula, oritaiti, plenty Polynesian styles all my life nearly, but I hadn't really been making lei of this kind until I moved to the Pacific Northwest, and I rediscovered this new vehicle for healing, and for being creative and expressing myself and like working with my hands. The more I created lei, the more I realized that though I never created this particular lei before, like what you see before in these photos was my first time making that lei. Once I start weaving, I'm reminded that by my ever moving hands, perhaps in a previous life, I had made this lei. On to the next slide. Much like how I grew up devaluing myself and my lack of knowledge of my land, my home, my language, and never feeling confident enough of being enough, never being enough Native Hawaiian, never being enough Black, never being enough Japanese, never being enough Chinese. I was just never fitting into one ideal. And I even felt that way about my own name. Kalei means the lei. And I felt like it was super common, or I just like didn't know how to identify with it. And my mom's probably like rolling her eyes because she named, well, my grand aunt named me that. But also regarding my fuller Hawaiian name, Kalei'okalani, it means lei of the heaven. But I had learned in school, once I started attending Kamehameha schools for Native Hawaiian children, that I was spelled my name with an okina, like a little apostrophe looking thing, a guttural stop. And that changes the meaning, and it is incorrect to spell my name that way. But I keep going on this journey and I start weaving more lei, and I'm looking for any chance to learn more. And so I'm in this is also around my wedding time. I'm in an antique store and I happen upon a copy of Kalei, the Lei of Hawaii by Marie Lelehua McDonald. It's just buried on the side, had to buy it. And what was interesting was that she also went on a very similar journey, although this book was like decades before my time. And this is some quotes from it. Most alarming was the fact that I was 22 years old, of half Hawaiian ancestry, with 4 years of college tucked under my belt, and I did not know this story and many more stories that had come out of my environment and my hereditary past. I read more, listened more, searched more, and appreciated more the legacy that was always mine. I was in the midst of discovering the Hawaii of my heritage, and any opportunity to discover more increased my curiosity and my enthusiasm. The excitement and awe that accompanied the discovery of even a simple fact was many times overwhelming. And later on in this book, she realizes that kupuna say it all the time, be careful what you name your children because they will live up to it. And that for the first time, later in the book, she says, I love you, name. Whichever way you are beautiful and you are me. And she embraced her name, Lelehua, an expert, a lay weaver. Yeah. And that's when I was like, man, I'm living up to my name. It is not incorrect. It is a mixture. It is a sign of survival of so many legacies woven together. It is me. Yeah. And I'm very proud. On my next slide, no worries, I'm almost done. This lei here was the first lei I ever created with A'ali'i makani. So A'ali'i from the island of Hawaii. I had never been able to work with such material because I had not grown up in Hawaii. It doesn't even grow on Oahu anymore. And this was brought over by Auntie Ray Pacheco, who was teaching a lei making workshop where 4 Days of Aloha Festival in Vancouver in 2019. That's my first time working with A'ali'i. And it's delicate, but it's also known for its undeniable strength that stands proudly in the face of even the greatest winds that come across Hawaii. So my lei, again, it's a way to heal. It's a physical expression of my mixed nature, my own upbringing, my own identity, that these flowers and leaves are from many places or stories and meanings, and they appear different. As a haku lei or lei weaver and creator, I am a stakeholder with a pono or righteous belonging to my culture, my people, and my art form. I have a righteous belonging and I embrace that. That is in itself Hawaiian. On my last slide here, I just wanted to show, that's Oku'uipo, that's my sweetheart again. And I just wanted to dedicate this presentation to him, who has seen me grow from a novice to a lei weaver, who has lifted me countless pounds of flowers from the car into the hale, from the hale into the buckets, from the buckets to the event, who has watched very lovingly as stems and pollen just deepen themselves into the carpet as I make lei, who put on Hawaiian music for me as I'm weaving for countless hours. My fingers are all green. Who even for this presentation, as I was preparing late into past midnight, made me a smoothie and asked if I was okay. I was honored to make this lei la'i for him, the first lei of its kind I ever made for myself. It's a physical embodiment of strength and protection and the way he makes me feel always. So, aloha wau ia oe ku'uipo, mahalo.
Thank you so much, Kalei. All right, Kevin, you are up next.
Hi everyone. First, I'd like to thank the Five Oaks Museum staff, especially Lehua, Victoria, and Molly, for reaching out to fellow artists like myself and to providing the opportunity to share our work in the DISplace gallery and a forum to raise complex issues. I also really appreciate everybody that came. My auntie Jody and my auntie Letha, I'm very happy to see you guys. And I want to thank Kalei very much because so my wife is in Hirahiti Mana, and when Kalei talks to my wife Kristen talks to me, and it's very special. You know, like it's something that we've learned to share together now, and it brought me to this DISplace gallery. So that's super awesome. I'm always inspired by other artists who talk about their work, and especially the artists in the DISplace gallery. And those guys were super courageous in being able to talk about stuff, about their artwork and their ethnic identity. I don't talk about my artwork and I don't talk about my ethnic identity at all. But so this is like a big step for me. And but I created the NMX. So I'm gonna introduce myself with the next slide. So my full name is Kevin Matthew Kaunuaki'i Kiesel. I was born and grew up on Oahu in Wahiawa. And it's actually like, so from my house, you could see Mount Ka'ala from the back. So from Waianae, you can see Mount Ka'ala from the other side. So I was on the other side of the mountain that Kalei grew up in. I am mixed Hawaiian ethnicity. I'm Hawaiian, Chinese, and Caucasian. My name is German, but I never met my dad, so I don't really know what else is going on. I was raised by my single mother, Wilmette Kehaulani Kiesel, and my grandparents, William Kahui Kiesel, and my grandma, Carol Mililani Kiesel. All of them passed away now. And we don't really have very many pictures of the house. So everybody digitize your pictures. You know, you never know when you're gonna be giving a talk about your childhood. So I just made like a quick line drawing of the house. So growing up, I started drawing as a kid and continued sporadically throughout most of my life. I like to draw like spaceships and stuff, and growing up there wasn't very much opportunity for me to really learn that in Hawaii, you know. But I still encountered a lot of ideas of futuristic exploration here and there that are linked to Hawaiian culture. I graduated from Lehuauakea in Wahiawa, but I went to grade school in the next town over in Mililani, and the two towns are kind of far apart from each other. So I used to have to walk to the library and wait for my mom to pick me up after school, sometimes really late at night. Rather than do homework, I just read a lot of sci-fi books and comics. And I just became fascinated more with spaceships and stories and art and the philosophies behind it. And there were a couple of books that I read like over and over. And one of them was this book called 21st Century Foss by Chris Foss. He's a 70s artist that I was reading. And so this was like around like 1986. The other one was this art book of this movie called 2010. And I used to just sit at the table and draw all the pictures, you know. And but if we just go to the next slide. So at the time, my mom worked in education, and so she taught literacy to adults who were illiterate, you know, all over the island. And that was and I was around 10, and it was very humbling to see that, you know, growing up, just seeing that kind of vulnerability in people sometimes, and the dedication that people have in order to just get better. You know, it was really great, and being a part of that with my mom was very special. But anyway, we got to see Nainoa Thompson, who is the navigator of the Hokulea, and the Hokulea is a voyaging canoe that's meant to sail across the Pacific. And at the time in 1986, I think it was going to Tahiti. And if I remember right, it was at Pokai Bay. And so it was sailing, and it was meant to just explore and connect with Hawaii's ancestral heritage. We saw them on the beach. What I liked as a kid was the canoe, the double-hulled canoe in the water. And I was super impressed by phrases like celestial navigation. Oh, and in 1986, there was also this Disney movie called Flight of the Navigator. And here was Nainoa Thompson, who was the navigator. And so as a kid, I was like, oh yeah, this guy's awesome. But it was the first time that it made me think of Hawaiians as being more than just a warrior or like a surfer icon kind of thing. You know, like there's a lot of preconceptions, and I started to think about ancient Hawaiians differently a little bit at that time. Also at that time, we were learning about Ellison Onizuka, who was in the Challenger from the space shuttle. So he was about to go into space, and it made me kind of think that maybe just being from Hawaii, that I could learn like other things. But so anyway, this is a sketch of like this hokulea kind of spaceship. I was gonna put a picture of the hokulea on it, but that kind of looked not cool. So yeah. And anyway, while my interest in science fiction and art grew, like I said, the opportunities were kind of slim. So I came to the Pacific Northwest, and I moved here in 2006, where I studied digital art at the Art Institute of Seattle. They're now closed. But I noticed that there was a huge contrast between how I saw myself and my experience back home compared to what other people assumed, you know? I began to want to make art that was based on my own experience and my own like view of things, rather than what everybody expected of what that view should be. Pulling from my heritage in order to evolve my art to create something that's more sincere and true to my personal memories and my ancestral memory. I started to search for more artists from Hawaii, and there are others that are honoring their culture. And I really admire what they do to remember where they come from. And my mom had always told me to remember where I come from, but back then, I didn't really understand what that really meant. I thought that it just meant like, oh, just remember you come from Hawaii, right? But it means so much more than that. You know, like it means remembering everything that makes up your family, everything that makes up all of the things that they could teach you. And, you know, and and a lot of times now, like it's so late that sometimes I feel like such an amateur Hawaiian. The Five Oaks DISplace exposition helped me realize the history and the relationship between the Pacific Northwest and the white people that went before, like airlines and cheap tickets. And this became a part of my own self-initiative to discover what it means to be Hawaiian and to integrate ways for me to contribute to the culture, you know, so that the culture can continue. If we could get to the next slide. So the idea for making the NMX originated when I learned of the museum gallery call for artwork. I learned it from Kalei'okalani, featuring artists with ties to Hawaii and the Pacific Northwest. I started to ask myself, how can I contribute from a perspective of being Native Hawaiian or Kanaka Maoli? And I don't know much about plants. I just looked at plants that reminded me of home. I discovered on botany.org that endemic species grow in a specific area that may be wide or narrow geographically, and they're distributed along wind and ocean currents or other migration routes. You know, a mech is a sci-fi concept, usually of a giant walking machine. Their forms, like I chose them because they have like a lot of personality. And so this kind of triggered the idea stream of words, endemic, like endemic plants, plus a mech is an endemic. As something that travels, I felt that mech should have something that connects them to their origins. And I started to look back on my life in Hawaii. One of the things that I miss a lot is the colors in the environment. Here in the Pacific Northwest, the colors seem very cool, like lots of blues and grays. It's beautiful, but I often miss the warmth of Hawaii's like tropical vibrancy. A main reason for choosing the plants and species that I chose was their color palette. After looking up different endemic plants, I began to recognize some of the plants that I grew up with. I seen the Mauhauhele and the Naupaka. I felt kind of bonded to them. The coalflower from the coal tree, which is the orange one, you can see a lot at public parks. There's plenty of trees that you just sit down under. The Mauhauhele, the yellow hibiscus, is also the state flower, but my grandma used to call it the hotel flower because it was always at the hotels. And the Naupaka, you can see on like all the beaches. The Naupaka is the white and purple one. So we can go to the next slide. So using flowers as camouflage scheme came from patterns in aloha shirts and sportswear, and camouflage is used as a means to break up an outline and make it unidentifiable by main appearance surroundings. I use it to break up the masculine forms of the mechs to make them appear less aggressive. That they're not meant to be like material machines. They're meant to be like intelligent and discover. The coal mech shape evolved from the pit bull and a lifted truck. The Mauhauhele mech was inspired by the Nohoa katydid, which is also an endemic species, and the Naupaka mech was inspired by the hoary bat. So making the endemics was a multi-stage process. And a lot of these I used in, that I learned here in Seattle with 3D and 2D illustration and design. And the first stage was a really rough sketch. That's the thing that's all the way in the corner. Then I constructed it in 3D using Maya in order to make like the model. It's a 3D model. And then I made the textures of the flowers in Photoshop and Illustrator. So I hand painted like the textures that went over the mech. And then using another program called Blender, I put it all, it's called rendering, where they put all of that information and they make like a solid one image. The water on the ground in the other mech, in the pictures was like a happy little 3D thing, and the skies that were pictured in the picture were like photo bashing, where you just take a bunch of stuff, you paint over it, and you take a picture of a sky and you paint over it in order to make it fit the exact mood that you want. And so there's like the funny little color thing that's on the bottom of there is something called an ID mask. And when I paint over things in Photoshop, I use that little funny color drawing that's on the bottom in order to mask out areas in Photoshop so that it's easier to paint over. People who cut out photographs by using like the lasso tool will probably know how annoying that is. But with this way, it lets me just like select a solid color and it creates the mask for me. So if we can get to the next slide. So growing up, I did not at the time relate to the popular art that I saw in hotels, museums, and the local publications, and all of the graphic design stuff that was in Hawaii, and on buildings of like whales and dolphins and stuff. And I didn't see my kind of art belonging in Hawaiian culture. In art school, I met other artists of different ethnicities that were inspired by their culture, and they used it in their work. And I was able to meet other science fiction artists and enthusiasts, but none of them happened to be from my background, from Hawaii. I never saw anyone with my background doing the kind of art that I wanted to do. When the Five Oaks put out the call for artists in the Pacific Northwest, I was again trying to determine what would be considered Hawaiian art. Was my science fiction art, could that become Hawaiian art? Was that considered that? I mean, by me being Hawaiian, it should be just Hawaiian art, right? Because that seems to be the way that it works for everyone else. It seemed defined by others in different ways. The Hawaiian art seemed defined by others in different ways. From a historical perspective, the tourist gaze, the expectations that people here on the mainland perceive that it should be. While I was creating the Endemex, I was confronted with a bunch of feelings and some hesitation. It made me ask some important questions, like what determines authenticity? I questioned my own authenticity of being enough Native Hawaiian ethnically, and whether what I was making could qualify as Hawaiian art or even good art. So how do I define my work? And I questioned whether I could honor my ancestry through art. And who do I make the art for? I wondered whether my art was authentic enough even among other Hawaiian artists. Hawaiian culture is constantly being redefined according to popular media and commodified culture. However, Hawaiian art is having a new vision that I'm very excited about. At the end of my college years, I started to hear about several other Hawaii-based artists who were focused on science fiction concepts. And most recently, I learned about an artist named Solomon Enos. I thought about putting up his work, but it felt kind of weird talking about somebody else's artwork in a way that would be meaningful. And he directly pulls from Hawaiian mythology to incorporate in his art. Being able to participate with other artists like myself, or just knowing about them, enables me to see others from my culture who expresses themselves in a way that I can relate to. They influence how Hawaiian art and culture can be perceived in the future. I mean, I hope to be a part of that. That'd be cool. And depicting Hawaiian art and ideas that are as diverse and far-reaching as Native Hawaiian people themselves. And this is why I felt good to be here tonight. So anyway, that's all I got. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thank you so much, Kevin. It's amazing, both of you, to like hear more about the background behind your work. And even as I'm just like watching both of you talk, it's like you start seeing all the connections between your artistic practices. Really cool. And thank you for, sharing so like openly and vulnerably. Like,
Yeah,
like Nathaniel is saying, well, he's saying in the chat, there's the persuasive question of like being enough that I'm hearing from both of you. All right, we are going to segue into a conversation with Lehua. It's going to moderate and hang out and chat. And then we'll do an audience Q&A around like 7:15.
Aloha mai kākou, everyone. My name is Lehuauakea. I'm half of the curatorial duo from DISplace. Just want to say mahalo nui to Kevin and Kalei'okalani for sharing so vulnerably and openly and generously with us all tonight. Like Victoria was saying, it was really cool to see you guys dive deeper into your practice and share a bit about where these images and these pieces come from and how they flow back into your personal experience and your own stories. I guess I want to start off with asking, so you guys are both featured in this piece. Was this something that you had done something similar to before? Were you guys, either of you, featured in something like a museum show or in a gallery context before, or was this an entirely new experience for you?
So for me, this was brand new. I had never done anything like this before. Like, this is the first time. And this was like, so I guess the way that it seemed for me was I'm a very private and quiet person, and I really needed to try to be able to express myself better. And so this whole process for me was a journey that lets me explore many issues that I feel like is becoming a part of me, you know, and you know the DISplace gallery seemed like a really perfect fit for me to try to show that.
For me, also much mahalo to Kevin and your presentation. It was just so like, yes, yes, yes. So like totally understand. But to Lehua's question, I had exhibited a lot of those photos, other than it drying on my wall at home, was taken from my first exhibit I was ever in, which was recent, or I guess that was in 2017 or 18. And it was with my lay, but my being more and more vulnerable has definitely changed or come about with the DISplace exhibit. And just the wordplay on that, like, oh, it's DISplace that we're at, but it's also like we've been displaced as you know, our identity outside of Hawaii, but also coming here, who are we now kind of thing. And I like that there's wordplay with both DISplace and also endemics. And Kalei'okalani, nah, just kidding. But but the vulnerability opened up a lot more with DISplace, just because it made it a place to be okay to feel displacement and live in it, and not just wallow in it, but like thrive in it. So it really, DISplace exhibit has really opened doors for that. Whereas before I felt like, oh, I have to come like expert lay weaver, and you know, but it's such a journey that I'll forever be on. And that's more what it's about, as opposed to the final destination. So mahalo.
Yeah, that's awesome. So being, I guess for Kevin, this is more directed for you. Being this, since this was your first kind of iteration of something like this, an experience for you, what did you learn from being part of this place, and did it make you feel more comfortable to maybe pursue something like this in the future?
Yeah, I think as I gradually like you know, the cultural aspect, and I suppose like I'm always looking for the sincerity of my art, you know, and I mean, and having it come from someplace that is meaningful seems more like something that I would want to do, more than just like regular, you know, just art. You know, I don't know how to explain that properly. I'm totally missing it here. Yes, yeah. So it is like this experience, like even with between you and Kalei, like you guys have been really great, like ambassadors of like the art community, because it makes it so less scary, you know. So thank you very much for that. But I think for me, this is all about like the journey that my art is kind of taking me along in the pursuit of sincerity, you know, to really understand myself. And being seeing people like Kalei and you being so expressive of where you come from is very encouraging to me. You know, I mean, like for me, I don't know, I feel like I got kind of washed up coming to the mainland a little bit. in trying to be what everybody was expecting me to be, you know, and just seeing all the other artists that were so free is, it very much touches me and makes me like be more courageous about my art, you know, like, so yeah, I guess, so yes, yeah, I want to do more art, you know, but yeah.
That's awesome to hear. Thank you. Another kind of bit of feedback that we got from our contributors, whether they were our artists or storytellers or local community members, a common theme that we heard back from these individuals was that they oftentimes felt they were alone in their experience or didn't know how to articulate it until something like this, like a platform like this, was given to them. And so after shows like DISplace, they felt much more comfortable in their experience and felt like they weren't alone. And they had a lot of parallels between the stories and experiences of other contributors within the exhibition. How do you feel that that played out for you, and do you think that it'll affect the trajectory of your work going forward?
Yes, it definitely will. I mean, so if you, like on the slides that had the 2 sketches, you know, those were when I was writing the speech to be able to give, suddenly I felt really okay with showing them, you know, like, because they were made out of thinking back of my experiences growing up, and like integrating it with my love of science fiction and putting them together, you know. So this is definitely going to be a part of my process. You know, I think it's kind of weird sometimes because, especially here in Seattle, where like there's like a lot of different like concept art and a lot of different uh, graphic design and illustration people, and it's almost like you have to have 2 different identities, you know. There's a really good one who's out on the Big Island. Actually, both of them, and both of them went to Kamehameha too. And when I wanted to mention them, suddenly it became really strange for me because I kind of didn't know if they wanted to be outed, you know, into the Hawaiian community like that. Because for me, this is like a very scary thing, you know, so, and I didn't feel comfortable bringing them in. Solomon Enos, on the other hand, like that guy is like very vocal, so I didn't really have a problem with that. But for the others, like, it just seems strange. And then I thought about why does it seem strange for me, you know? But anyway, yeah, that's kind of how I feel about that. So being seeming alone is definitely a part of it, especially in science fiction Hawaiian art. I mean, and there are others that I don't know if they want to be known as Hawaiian science fiction artists, you know. I think that, yeah.
That phrase, like, it's almost like you have to have 2 different identities. Is my life story. Put that as the title of my book and put my face on it. Yeah, no, it's such a true statement. Not only when you do come to the continental US, yeah, but like even in Hawaii too. I've felt like I've always had to have 2 separate selves, and never being wholly myself. And I still find myself doing that.
He's trying to get the cat.
Eku mama, you have to mute yourself. That's my mom. Both my moms are in here right now, actually. Aloha, moms. Love her. But yeah, it's like you can't be wholly yourself. It's definitely in Hawaii too, within Hawaiian, the Kanaka community, it's either you are one or you're not. There's no room. and that's like within our own peoples, you know, and we have to like heal ourselves and heal each other in that. We have to be more gracious with each other and gracious with ourselves. Because it's either, yeah, you full-blown Kanaka or you just not Kanaka at all. You're not native enough. And even when I speak Olelo Hawaii, you know, that's just me practicing, you know what I mean? I'm like practicing, I'm learning, I'm trying to use it as much as I can, but I do feel very nervous to use it not being like fully Kanaka or fluent, super fluent, you know, like, so that's just an example. And to Lehua's question, that's the importance of representation, of like all kinds of stories. As soon as you give a platform for a story, people come out in droves who relate to you that you had no idea where were they before. It's because there wasn't a platform. Nobody wanted to lift up these stories for fear of penalization or like getting, you know, for fear of negative consequences. But more often than not, in a right caring world, when you do give that platform and represent, it will have positive effects. That you know, that's almost like the Me Too movement, for example, you know, like that opened up a whole other healing process for myself in particular. And it's just hearing stories of people that never had a platform to share before. So yeah, that's the beauty of DISplace.
Thank you. Thank you. I guess I kind of want to shift more to talk about the concept of your work and the materials that you both use. I noticed, you know, there are a lot of differences between the work that you do. One being very, the word traditional is kind of, it can go, you know, many different ways, but lay, contemporary lay, you know, is pulling on traditional ancestral knowledge. And then while we have Kevin's work being very kind of more modern, futuristic with the technological basis and digital platforms. But there are a lot of similarities that I noticed too between the themes that you're working with and focusing on plants and native species versus endemic species versus species that are just not from Hawaii or native to the Pacific Northwest, et cetera. So I guess, you know, both of you can answer this, but how are you incorporating kind of ecological concerns into the work that you're doing, especially with today's thinking? It's very, ecological issues are a very prevalent topic, not just for artists, but for society at large. We are facing a lot of ecological challenges right now. How are you incorporating those ideas into the work that you make today?
I guess I'll answer for a little bit. So the endemics that were created, if you notice, they're kind of walking on water. So the thinking is that like with raising sea levels, that maybe different parts of the island would get cut off, you know, during high tide. So the endemics would have to like walk through like these, the only way to get to like so if you were trying to get from, let's say Waikiki to town or something in high tide, you would have to be able to walk over like through the water, you know, like you couldn't get there by car. So that was kind of the idea behind the endemics and like having them in water. But so I guess that there's kind of that aspect of climate change a little bit, and that's about all as far as like my little boy brain got with the endemics and climate change. But yeah, I totally agree with you though, especially in Hawaii, because it is an island, you know, like raising sea levels is very difficult, and already like where it's situated, like 1 or 2 degrees elevated would make Hawaii very hard to live in. And I don't know about how it would affect tourism. Like that's a very big thing. Yeah, that's all I got. Yeah.
Mahalo. To that question, when I share, or like especially when I lead lei making workshops, I do talk about the connection to the aina, the connection to the land, and a little bit of history of how so many of our endemic plants that Kevin had pointed out in his work, native species are extremely endangered or no longer around, again, due to deforestation or just like development. Also introduced species, invasive species that destroy our forests, right? But another element too to that is sharing about how ancestral knowledge can speak to the preservation of our plants while still perpetuating use, respectful, like sustainable use of our plants too. Something that I can't physically participate in, not myself being in Hawaii, and instead being up here and using plants up here from the Pacific Northwest. But I talked about how Auntie Ray Pacheco brought A'ali'i from Hawaii. Yeah. And in her journey, now she cannot just go on the mountain to one, Oli, for her entrance, to come with respect, right? And then pick only what she needed and no more, and to Oli in thanks. She can't do that so easily because she's going to get stopped by developers. What are you doing on this land? Where are your papers of proof that you belong here? So yes, Auntie Ray has to go through all these, legal loopholes and get paperwork just to do what our ancestors have been doing for so long. Yeah. And it's because of the mistreatment of the land by outside sources, and a lack of knowledge about and respect for the knowledge of the people who have been here. It's awful lack of relationship. So that there are ways to learn more about it is how I share about that when I'm teaching about lei making, and the consequences, very real, physical to our aina and spiritual too, but also to our practices, and how that intersects. So hopefully that answers that.
Yeah, no, mahalo nui. Thank you guys both for just sharing a little bit more about your work. I think that it's time to move on, if I'm not mistaken, according to Victoria's schedule here, so that we can eventually open it up shortly to questions and comments from the audience here. But before I do that, I just wanted to share a little bit about a project that we're thinking and working on beyond the lifespan of this place and beyond the museum. With this exhibition, we wanted to consider how these ideas and these impacts can have a long-term goal or purpose to serve our community at large. And so the museum has supported a new initiative that I'm leading. It's called the Pacifica Action Awards. And this is a new award program to provide financial support to our Oregon graduating high school seniors of Pacifica ancestry to pursue their goals related to community commitment and cultural preservation. And so we want to encourage, like we were with all the artists that were included in DISplace, we wanted to encourage them to be themselves, be comfortable in their culture, and continue giving back in whatever ways that they can, whether that be through college education or something else entirely. And so this award program is dedicated to doing just that. And we can drop a link in the chat if you'd like to donate directly to those awards. The first round of funding will be provided in May or June of this year. So that's really coming up. We are looking to raise as much money to give back to our Oregon Pacifica youth. If you'd also like to support this initiative in another way, we are creating a new publication that features Pacifica artists and creators exclusively. It's called the Kupa'a magazine. And we can also, I'll type the Instagram handle in the chat so that you guys can follow along there. That publication will be released at the end of March or early April. And again, all of the proceeds from the sales and pre-orders of the magazine, which just went live this Monday, will be going towards this award fund. So every dollar that you contribute to the donation or the magazine publication will be going straight back into our communities here in the Pacific Northwest, which is something that I always advocate for. So we hope that you can join us. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me or follow along at our Instagram, and I'll type that into the chat right now. But right now we can just open it up to any questions from the audience for Kalei and Kevin.
Aloha. I don't have a question, but I have a comment. Mahalo nui for your work and your words. Both of your talks gave me chicken skin and made me tear up. Your work is so important. And the coolest thing I saw in both of your work is, although it's so different, it's a testament to Indigenous people's connection to the natural world and the land, you know? So cool to see that in this contemporary work. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thanks, Connolly.
Mahalo, Connolly. I also like how it adds to the conversation that needs to continue to grow of like how complex we are as people. Like Kevin had touched on it too. Like there's stereotypes and that's it. That's all we can fit in. And if you don't fit in, get out. But that we are not just a monolith, Native Hawaiians. Like we are very complex, very individual people. As much as we rep unity and that group mindset as well, that ohana, you know, value, we are very, very individual to it. I appreciate that comment.
It looks like we have another question from Herman. What are your short-term goals in the next 1 to 3 years?
I guess, so for me, within the next 1 to 3 years, I'm trying to get better, you know, I'm just trying to become a better artist. And I think that, and also like, since I recently discovered, I really want to be able to learn more about my culture, you know? So I think within the next 1 to 3 years, it's all just about discovery, you know, like for now, you know, for me anyway, like that's kind of where I am in the journey.
Mahalo, Herman. My plan is my baby. My Kitman is my ku'ipo, my husband, and he and I, yeah, are embarking on this journey. I'm very excited to share all of these things. Like I'm excited to share what I learned about my name, or like what papa means, or, you know, anything, everything, all of it, the little stuff and the big stuff with our Pepe, with our baby. Not just because oh my gosh, I got to make sure my baby is Hawaiian, you know, but because it's important to me. Like I want my baby to know who I am over time. And, you know, our baby is going to be whoever they're going to be but when they grow up. But giving honor to our ancestors, to our past, to our lands. This Pepe is going to be a baby of many lands. And I do want them to know all of it. And I want for the next 1 to 3 years, just to enjoy that ride, not feeling pressured that they have to know one thing or another, but just knowing, or I want them to see me feeling confident, even when I'm self-conscious, even when I don't know. I want them to see me confident trying to figure things out, if that makes sense, so that they can move through the world more comfortable in their own skin, more than I am now. And I guess that's what you always want for your future, yeah, to have more than what you had yourself. So that's my next 1 to 2 years. Oh, that's a great question, Troy. It's a great question, just because it so happened, yeah, like me leaving home has truly inspired me to be more connected to home. And I know I've had conversations with a lot of Hawaiians who felt that same way too. And I want to honor that and totally lift that, because that is a true experience that should be respected just as much as the same possibility that could have happened at home and is still happening for people, Native Hawaiians at home. Like the revitalization at home is totally happening. I see it among my ho'aloha, my friends who have not left the Aina, yeah, and are themselves experiencing this like rise in inspiration and confidence and just kukanaka action. And both can happen. Both can totally happen. That one did not happen for me. I had to leave and figure that out, and I'm still figuring that out. But I am a lot. And when Kevin was saying like all of these plants, like, oh, you see them all in parks or you see them at the hotels, like that was so beautiful to me, because what's crazy, and I'm no longer too afraid to admit it, because this space, like we said earlier, I never noticed those growing up. Like I didn't appreciate it. I didn't see it. I didn't know. I never used them for lei. I never got a lei with those in it, you know, with naupaka, all that beautiful legends and or histories. But now I go home and I see them everywhere. My husband can attest to it. And we be on the freeway. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's the one, you know, plant that looks like octopus. And it's really opened my eyes. So I'm very grateful for this, and I'm grateful to my makohini, my mama, because it's hard. It was hard, I'm sure, for her, you know, the ohana dynamic, but she made a deal with all of her children. As much as it was hard to see us go, that she wanted us to go and experience, not for lack of the greatness of Hawaii, but just wanting us to take some time now to explore. And we had, and I really forever grateful for that.
Yeah, I totally agree with Colette. I mean, you know what, actually, I didn't really notice all these plants until I started researching to see what was endemic. And then I started remembering about all the different places that I remember seeing these, you know, like, so in order to make something that I felt was authentic Hawaiian, I had to pull from my real memories, which is part of the reason why I chose those flowers. You know, like it would have been easy to like put like, oh, I'll just have these mechs with a bird of paradise. But, you know, like how much of that did I really experience? I didn't, you know, like I didn't really experience anything about the bird of paradise, but I do remember like the naupaka, the mahauhele, and the coal, you know, like, so those are the reasons, you know, that I kind of chose all of these things. But Troy, hey, it's so awesome to see you. Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely going to be a part of my work probably from now on, you know. I think gradually as I become more comfortable with uh, myself as a Hawaiian identity, I won't need to have them be separate anymore, you know, to where I I can like navigate the world on the mainland, you know, because what Kalei was talking about was so true. Like, I mean, growing up in Hawaii, in Wahila, as a sci-fi nerd, kind of wasn't like a Hawaiian thing to be, you know, and I got like a lot of, you know, like not outsider, but a lot of really confused looks, you know, like sometimes like, and I felt a lot of times like, um, I doubted my authenticity because of that back at home. And I think now that I had to leave and realize how important it is to me to be that Hawaiian, and I guess to be able to give a message somehow through my artwork that you can be the kind of Hawaiian that you choose to be, no matter what it is, any way you can, that you want to contribute, you know, and not to feel pressured by both cultures that are involved with like, you know, tourism and like, or even other peer pressures from like, because I know my grandpa, he didn't really understand me, you know, at all, you know. So I felt like a lot of pressure from him in order to just be more normal, you know, more like a regular Hawaiian, you know, because he was like a very traditional kind of guy. And so, but yeah, Troy, that's kind of how I see it going on. You know, like, I'm going to try to be able to integrate it all together, to where I can have the confidence to be able to navigate both worlds that I live in as one solid individual artist. You know, that's a Hawaiian sci-fi artist. You know, that's the goal anyway. Yeah, but yeah. Anyway, it's good to see you, Troy. Yeah. I'm so happy. Yeah.
This kind of ties into another question that we got. Can you speak to the trade-offs of leaving Hawaii, but perhaps gaining an outsider's perspective as the mainland becomes your new home? Is there anything that either of you would like to add on to what you just said?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the trade-off is like, I'm always missing home. I'm always missing Hawaii. And from that place, that's where this burning desire comes to continue to work really hard to be connected to it. I miss my ohana. And from that place of like a beautiful kind of pain is where the best kind of art comes from, and the best kind of intention comes from for me. And so like, man, if I have to be away from home and I have to be away from so much ohana, like that is a trade-off. Then and I would say, yeah.
Yeah, I guess, so for me, when my parents had passed away, it kind of felt like I had left a lot behind, you know, and now as I'm struggling to connect myself together back to Hawaii, I find that like a lot of family that I haven't seen in a really long time suddenly means something so much more. And I wouldn't have appreciated it unless I left, you know? And I think the trade-offs I feel when I go back home to live permanently, I want all of the experiences to be worth this time away, you know? And I guess that's how I feel about the trade-off of what I've lost, you know, like it'll be worth it when I come back as a new person, you know, and I don't, that's just kind of how I feel, yeah.
And I think that also speaks to my Kalei'okala'i's question of like, did you feel like we came into our talents at a point where we can appreciate this? And yeah, just like how I didn't appreciate the lau and pua that were around me in my own home, like I do honestly believe like having left home put me into this place, into this mindset, into this like kuleana, my responsibility to appreciate it. And to, yeah, perpetuate my kuleana, my responsibility to stay connected to and to share as like in means of this event here. So mahalo.
So thank you, everyone. Thank you for your questions, and to Kalei and Kevin for sharing. It looks like we're about at that time for us to return to whatever it was we were doing before this. But yeah, if you'd like to connect with the museum, visit us at fiveoaksmuseum.org. If you'd like to follow along with our project, Pupa'a Magazine, that Instagram handle is in the chat, as well as a donation link to pre-order the magazine or donate directly to the awards, the Pacifica Action Awards themselves. Otherwise, you can follow along Kevin's work and Kalei's work. If you guys would both like to drop your Instagram handles or websites, feel free to do that in the chat too. I'm sure lots of us would like to see what is, you know, what's gonna come up in the works for you guys in the months and years to come. So feel free to share. And yeah, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. It's been awesome.
And I can also my hakubaku, my puppy was on screen. That's him. That's my first baby, my fur baby. Mahalo everybody. Thank you for everyone in the chat, everyone who's joined us today. And I don't know if Victoria was gonna share anything or Molly or not, but I would like to close out with an oli. Uhola ia kamakaloala. Ai ke alohala. Kukahi ia kahaloala. Pavehi mai na lehua. Mai ko opuhia kahalavaila. Mahalo e na kua. Mahalo e na kupunala ea. Mahalo me ke alohala. Mahalo me ke alohala. The makaloa mat has been unfurled and we have shared in the sustenance of life. The great breath of life has been exchanged and the lehua adorns and refreshes, giving thanks from zenith to horizon, to our ancestors, to the gods, and to all of us here. Mahalo nui loa. Thanks and love.